Kain Warwick is the founder of Synthetix and a total crypto OG. Synthetix is a new financial primitive enabling the creation of synthetic assets, offering unique derivatives and exposure to real-world assets on the blockchain. Today, we dive into what's next for Synthetix with the latest V3 launch, what will cause the next big leg up in DeFi, what we're calling DeFi Summer 2, the differentiation between different perps that exist in crypto, how Synthetix made the decision to launch on a layer 2 so quickly and burn all bridges behind them. And it gets pretty spicy with some tea on FTX and Three Arrows Capital. Before we dive into this, Kain is going to tell us what he's been up to since we last spoke to him about what it takes to scale Ethereum last year.
I think, the last 3 or 4 months for me has been a bit of a break from the ecosystem. I'd had many years of kind of continued obsessive, engagement in the community. And I kind of took a step back from Synthetix governance. Look, to be perfectly frank and transparent, I just wanted to kind of take a look at myself. And, it had been a long time since I'd actually, thought about what I was doing, what I was trying to get out of things. And it's been really helpful. It's been really a helpful process for me to go through. So, the last month or so has been kind of getting back into things and starting to kind of get a sense of where things are at.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that time off is super important in a space that's 24/7 and sucks all of your attention. So it's great you were able to take a little break and then emerge. And we're super excited that you're on the Defiant with that emergence. And you definitely qualify as a crypto OG. So tell us a little bit about your history. You're most known for Synthetix, I think, as many listeners know.
Yeah, I think, people kind of are aware that I ran a payment gateway back in 2014. We started it as a way to allow people to convert fiat into digital. It wasn't aimed at crypto necessarily, but it became a really kind of compelling use case, this fiat into crypto use case. And so that business still runs. It's called Blue Shift. We've got 2,000 locations around Australia where people can take fiat and convert it into crypto, as well as other things, right? There's a bunch of stuff that it does. So that's how I got into the space. I've known people like Asher10 from CoinJar because I was in online retail. And so I was always interested in the payment space. And, so Bitcoin to me was this interesting thing of how do we solve payments online, right? Obviously we've moved, multiple narratives away from, from digital currency and payments, in the Bitcoin land. But, I do think that that was kind of, what got me interested in the space in the first place. There were genuine problems in online commerce that were unsolved, and even the Stripes of the world and PayPals and stuff weren't really addressing those problems. So, crypto for me, that was kind of the entry point.
Amazing. Yeah, I think even Satoshi got it wrong, right? Satoshi thought it was going to be for payments and it turned out to be more for store of value. But, we're on the cusp with Lightning and hopefully we'll make developments there.
One day.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Visa does a pretty good job though, so it's not the easiest to compete with.
Agreed.
Amazing. Well, we were just providing infrastructure for it. You were fully in it. DeFi Summer, let's talk about it. What was that like leading up to that 2021 boom?
So I was talking to someone about this maybe a week or so ago. I've been kind of reaching out to people and having some conversations over the last month, and I was trying to explain it because they weren't in the space when this was going on, and I was there were people don't realize they think DeFi Summer was this huge thing. There were 50 people. It was not many people. It was just literally a bunch of Telegram groups, and someone would wake you up in the morning and be hey, there's a new yield farm. And the same people who were building the yield farms, who were doing the thing, it was all the same group of people. It was not there were millions of people doing this. And I do think that kind of, insanity that happened in DeFi Summer, kind of laid the groundwork then for this awareness of DeFi as a movement, but that kind of initial sort of very insular PvP game kind of style stuff that we were doing in DeFi Summer, was what proved that it could actually do things. Like, we had smart contracts that were doing things. Money was being made, money was being lost. It was a bit weird and self-contained, but it was a thing that was functional.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, in the middle of that boom, it definitely felt like we were kind of on the cusp of this end user adoption. And it seems like somewhere along the way that adoption didn't really happen. Do you kind of feel similarly?
I do. I think in the midst of DeFi Summer, transactions got expensive, right? And we were all like, oh, like this is, it costs more than $1 to like transfer ETH, right? Like, and, I think there was like a little bit of concern about that. Like, people would kind of talk about it like, oh, and, Synthetix in particular, the contracts were very complex back then. And the way that you deployed, complex smart contracts on Ethereum, was pretty different back then, right? And so we always had very high transaction costs. Again, you're talking, $3 versus $1, but like, back then that was meaningful money for, a lot of people in the space. And so people would complain. They're like, I can't believe I'm paying $8 to like claim this week. And so it was just always on our mind that like, that was a thing that we needed to address. And so, when DeFi Summer really kicked off, and then, probably like the March 2020 crash was when it became really obvious, like the network couldn't handle the amount of activity that was on it. There were too many interconnected systems, too many, arbitrage-like transactions where, you've got money over here, and you need to kind of, keep them in sync. When you have, two pots of money, it's fine. When you have 1,000, the kind of networking between those things that all had to run through Ethereum just was impossible for it to handle. And so, we saw transaction costs like blow up. It was like, 300-400 gwei to get a transaction on chain. This is when ETH was, not very expensive either, right? Like it became much worse later. So I do think that period in DeFi Summer where, we saw transactions were becoming expensive was like the early thing, and people kind of had an inkling this was a problem. But then when mass adoption happens, we didn't have the scale. We couldn't support it. It was impossible to support, 1 million users on Ethereum. It was too expensive.
And I assume that is what led you to start thinking about scaling. You were one of the first applications to migrate to a layer 2. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, this is an ongoing conversation in the Synthetix community from early 2019, right? Where people were like, Synthetix is too expensive to use, right? Like we were the original, like Ethereum is too expensive to use. It was like Synthetix is too expensive to use. This is a joke. Why are you guys, why are these transactions cost so high? And, we'd be like, oh, complexity, and you kind of hand wave it, and like we're working on stuff. But it really meant that like when the kind of and look, let's be honest, right? Like I sat in a room in 2017 and 2018 and listened to Vitalik like promise us that like scaling was coming, or ETH2 was almost here. It was good. And so we were like, yeah, this is someone else's problem. Like it'll be solved, right? We don't need to worry about this too much. And so we would kind of hand wave it, right, a little bit. And then we got to a point where we were like, okay, we can't hand wave this anymore. Like this is actually bad. Like this is impacting. Even if it wasn't mass adoption, it was impacting our adoption within the nascent DeFi community, because people would just write off Synthetix and be like, oh, it's too expensive to use it, I don't care, or whatever, right? And any kind of friction like that was really problematic. And so we were like, okay, guys, we get it. Vitalik's not going to do this for us this year. Like, let's go and and so once things like, Optimism and the Unipig demo and stuff popped up, Synthetix was ready to jump on that. And we did. And we just jumped straight on and we're like, hey guys, we've got a big problem. We need your help. And that was the initial conversations with, Jing and Carl and Kevin and those guys.
Amazing. And then is there anything that you wish you had done differently around that? And maybe speaking in the sense of someone who's thinking about it today, thinking about migrating to a layer 2.
We made, we made a decision to lean into that and kind of burn the boats, right? In the same way that we did on Ethereum, right? We're like, let's not, keep optionality open. Let's not, try and hedge our bets. Let's just make a decision, go all in, have a seat at the table in terms of what this network will look like. like speaking of optimism, right? And that's not the right decision for everyone, obviously. Like someone has to take the pain of that. But, the value that we got from being able to be connected to that early work that was going on in optimism and to, have this symbiotic relationship, this kind of, information sharing as like a complex smart contract suite, sharing that information of what that was like to run that with the people who are building this new network that was going to have to support those kinds of complex smart contracts was invaluable to the space. And we just sort of said, like, this is just going to be part of what happens, right? Someone has to do this. Someone has to kind of take the, put that effort in. And so we did it. Today, I think, people are in a situation where there are multiple, scaling solutions out there. There's Arbitrum, there's Optimism, there's Starkware, there's Starknet. Like there are multiple things, but I think the key thing for me is they're all within the Ethereum ecosystem. So regardless of which one, is your preferred flavor, we now have scaling within Ethereum, which was really all that I wanted, so.
Amazing. And then where do you think we're headed with DeFi? Obviously, we do have some product market fit, but what do you think will give DeFi that next leg up?
I think where we sort of sit now, right, is maybe in a position where it's like the kind of presage to DeFi Summer 2, right? Like people joked in 2020 about like DeFi Summer 2, it never happened, right? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that didn't happen. But people are like, well, DeFi Summer happened. Like obviously there's gonna have to be a DeFi Summer 2. And there was DeFi 2 for a while. Let's not forget about that, right? That meme. And DeFi 2 was just like taking the most kind of adversarial aspects of DeFi and just like isolating them into this like crazy like PvP game, right? Which was fun and cool and interesting, but I don't know that it was like sustainable, right? And so we kind of learned that lesson. But this idea that there would be like a DeFi Summer 2, has been floating around since 2019, right? The original DeFi Summer. And so I do think that now, 4 years later, we are actually in a position where that might happen. And one of the things that I think, I've been reflecting on is that DeFi as a whole, right, the collective DeFi kind of fucked it up, right? Like we didn't quite get there. And, there's people who are not in DeFi, but in the Ethereum community that I think are also somewhat, we have to take a little bit of responsibility for this, right? Infrastructure providers and, people working on scaling, we just didn't quite get there, right? And so what happened was people turned up before the party was ready, right? We hadn't put out all, we were just not ready for it. And so the problem with that was that we weren't able to provide solutions for people in a safe, transparent, non-custodial, decentralized way, right? And, people being people, they want what they want, and they went to centralized solutions, right? This idea of, another dominant centralized exchange popping up in 2019, we were all like, no, like there's Binance, but like no one's ever going to turn up and like be able to take on Binance. Like we're going to be the ones, we'll be the next ones who will be there. And we just weren't ready. We didn't get there. And then a whole bunch of other stuff happened, the Altel 1 thesis. And, there were a whole bunch of pop-dependent weird things that happened because we weren't ready for this influx of users. And the end result is that we let a bunch of criminals steal everyone's money. And that's on us, right? Like, we just, we really fucked that up, right? And I do think that we're in a position now with scaling, with the infrastructure, with all the things that we have, where we will, by the time people turn up this cycle, we'll be ready to offer a range of non-custodial solutions to the things that people want to do. They want to be able to trade. They want to be able to, transact with one another. They want to be able to play games. They want to be able to do all this stuff. And I think we will be ready this time. I hope we'll be ready. So when DeFi Summer happens, this time, DeFi Summer 2, the real DeFi Summer 2, I'm hoping that it is actually more like mass adoption than it was last time around, where it was just 50 people on a Telegram channel.
Totally amazing. Yeah, super excited for that. And it's interesting to think about those kind of components that have come together to get things ready now.
Synthetix just released their V2 perpetual futures trading contracts with the lowest fees of any decentralized perps markets available anywhere outside of a centralized exchange. Synthetix perps are available to trade with up to 25x leverage on optimism through two partner dApps, Quenta.io and Decentrex.com. The community intends to launch dozens of unique assets and is developing plans for trading incentives by the end of the month.
Are there any pieces that you think are lacking when it comes to the infrastructure or just things needed for that DeFi Summer 2?
So I think, the thing that attracts people, and we got some of this right. Like the thing, that attracted people to on-chain transactions was Uniswap, right? In that kind of last period, right? There were a lot of people who were interacting on Uniswap because it was faster at letting them do the dumb stuff that they wanted to do than anything else, right? Like Uniswap is faster than Binance, faster than FTX, faster than, all these other solutions, right? And so I think the ability to be responsive to user needs, right? Whatever those might be. We don't get to choose what the user wants, right? The user's wants and needs, we have to be able to be responsive to that, right? And the only way you can really be responsive is if you have a genuine competitive marketplace. And we just didn't, right? We didn't have a competitive marketplace of, spot trading. We kind of had Uniswap, right? And then there were a couple of things that popped up that really, couldn't compete with Uniswap, right? And we didn't really have, a competitive landscape of perp products. We do now. There's like 10 different perp products, right? And you can't be a credible marketplace if you've got one, person offering solutions. It's just not going to work. So I think this time the key is to have a range of solutions, and within the Ethereum ecosystem, we now have that. In whatever category of trading or activity that users want to do, staking services, all that stuff, like there's multiple solutions, and I think that just puts in a much better place than we were historically.
Yeah, and for some of the listeners who might not be as familiar with DeFi, can you break down those categories and the different players in each, just to kind of map it out?
Yeah. So, obviously like talking about, letting users give money to criminals, like one of the things that people want to be able to do in a bull market is they want to be able to borrow against their crypto assets. They don't want to sell them, right? Now that can take many forms, right? Like it can be that they want like a passive yield on their, Bitcoin or Ethereum, or they want to take out like a leveraged loan so they can YOLO, more crypto, right? Like whatever they want to do, that's not our problem. We can't decide what people want to do. We can't stop people from doing weird, crazy shit. They're going to do what they do. We just need to make sure that we have solutions that protect them as much as possible, right? And so one of the areas of infrastructure, I guess, that we did do fairly well with in DeFi Summer was in lending and borrowing. We had Aave, we had Compound, we had some aggregators, we had some, more weird and wonderful things. But, we had like a suite of solutions for that problem, and people were able to use it. Where I think it probably broke down a little bit is we didn't have, at that time, the capacity to sort of take on assets from like other ecosystems and like other chains and like Bitcoin. And, so people were just like, well, like I've got this app, and I can, go and send my crypto to them and they'll pay me a yield. Right. In order to be able to, do a better job. Now, you can't compete with fraud, right? Like it's really hard to compete with fraud. If someone's like, hey, download my app and I'll pay you, 28% interest for the rest of time and don't ask why. Some people are going to be tricked by that. And, one of the things you can't do in DeFi is give them fake, like it's too transparent. I can't be like, oh yeah, you get 28% yield if you deposit this into this smart contract. Like, maybe through tokens and all kinds of stuff. But like in terms of, like in-kind yield, it's just not possible. Like that doesn't exist, right? So there are things like that where I guess, you can't necessarily compete, but what you can do is create an environment where people understand the risks a little bit better. And if you have really good solutions to these problems, that just will occur naturally. And so, you've got lending, you've got trading, you've got perps and derivatives, you've got like yield generating things. But, like there isn't a huge amount of stuff that people want to do. There's only like 3 or 4 things they want to do. You just have to have robust solutions for all of them, and they need to be easy to access.
That totally makes sense. So then I guess I have a question, because I think one of the things that Sam and FTX were trying to do, aside from just siphoning off all the money that they could, was put equities on the blockchain, right? And he wanted to get things regulated so that we could see that future. What do you think about that? Is that something that you think there's an appetite for? Is that a future that's even possible given the regulatory stranglehold Wall Street has on the equities market?
So, Synthetix tried this, right? Synthetix and a few others, not naming any names, Tara. But, there were a few people out there who had this idea, right? And again, like, there's a lot of startup literature that is very dismissive of users. Users are idiots. They don't know what they want, right? Steve Jobs was like the poster, boy for this, right? Like, forget about if you let users design a phone, and have like antennas and shit and like 85 cameras, like users don't know what they want, right? You got to do what you think is right, and then let the users decide if they want that thing, right? You go out and optimize for something, right? And so I think that like this idea that users have, right? And there are degens in crypto that still say they want to trade equities, right? And yet you put them on the blockchain and you let them trade them and no one trades them. Now, there's reasons for that, and maybe some inefficiencies and liquidity, but like, there was liquidity, like people were not doing it. The only reason why people were trading on mirror equities was because they were yield farming, right? It was just like, transaction mining to get, tokens in the Terra ecosystem, right? There was no, I stand by the fact that I say like there was no genuine usage. And the same thing is true of Synthetix, right? Like people were only doing it because there were a couple of liquidity pools in Balancer and a few other places. And so, you can, I think I've come to a conclusion now after enough time in this space that if you create a market for something, right, and no one's trading it, like the fact that there was no market before is a really powerful indicator that there is no demand to trade that thing. Right. And so, sometimes you have to go out on a limb and say like, okay, let's try this, right? Let's see, maybe, there was just some weird structural inefficiency in the market that just couldn't allow this thing to happen. And so you go and you kind of do an experiment, but most of the time those experiments fail, because most of the time the market will solve something if people really want to trade it. And so my theory is that like people don't really want to trade equities on the blockchain in the current form that we're talking about. Now, if you like replace the NASDAQ with like a blockchain based platform, is that better? Yes, like for sure. I think that's a better solution. And eventually, is that Ethereum? Yes, maybe. But that requires like NASDAQ to participate. I don't think you can like circumvent that and just turn up and be like, oh, we're just going to siphon all the liquidity out of like NASDAQ. It's just not going to happen.
Totally. And that kind of goes back to that parallel of Visa and payments. You have to almost improve it in such a drastic way. And maybe that's not the need. So that's very interesting. We alluded to it, but I want to double click into the degen culture, the WAGMI culture. How much of an influence were the degen traders, including, Celsius, Three Arrows Capital, Alameda, the list goes on and on. Because in retrospect, to me, it feels like they were all engaging in this big zero-sum game and we were all kind of onlookers.
Yeah, I mean, in DeFi Summer, it's funny. Someone tweeted this at me and I'd forgotten this even happened, right? But like back in DeFi Summer, I called out Sam. I was like, dude, like, how are you putting $100 million into GAM V8? Like, what's going on? Like, what, like, how, like, who's taking the risk on that? Right. Like, and there was this weird implication that I think everyone kind of bought into. And this is, crypto, people turn up, right? They turn up and they turn up with wrapped in this mystique and secrecy. And, I went back and actually read the Madoff book. There's a lot of Madoff books, but I read one of the Madoff books, right? Because I think that is the playbook that a lot of these these people have taken when they come into crypto, right? You can wrap yourself in this mystique and secrecy, and people, you know, are all like whispering about like, oh, these like genius traders like just turned up and they're making all this money or whatever. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And it's like exactly what Madoff did. Madoff, you know, took over 20 years, right? Not over like 20 minutes, but, you know, like we do in crypto, but like over 20 years, Madoff did this, right? And people were like, oh, I don't want to like talk badly about this, you know, amazing guy who's, you know, got all this power, whatever. So yeah, like Sam turned up and he was, you know, Alameda, like you had heard rumors about these like amazing traders of doing all these crazy strategies and making so much money or whatever. Like, I'm sure that there were really obvious arbitrage opportunities early on, you know, through 2018, 2019 or whatever. And I'm sure they made some money on that. But when you actually add up the amount of money that they could have made from those things, it's probably in the tens of millions of dollars of profit. Like that's my ballpark, right? And 3 hours is very similar, right? 3 hours turned up and, you know, people are like, they've got 10 billion under management. And you're like, that's not possible. Like you can't be a prop trade. Like where the fuck did that money come from? And yet we all, including myself, were like, it's crypto, weird things happen, like YOLO, you know, back to like your whatever thing. But like the obvious answer was the right one. Right? Where were they getting the money from? They were getting the money from other people and pretending that it was theirs and doing all of this crazy degenerate shit and pretending like they had profits that they actually didn't. And, you know, this is the danger of on-chain transactions, right? Like Alameda was, you know, swinging around hundreds of millions of dollars and people are like, well, there's the money. You know, it's not like someone like Madoff was like, you know, just had a little book that he would write and be like, yep, I did $10 billion of trading today. Like these guys were actually trading huge size on chain. And that was convincing, you know, and I think got people to buy in. So, you know, in DeFi Summer, there was a lot of that, but there were also genuine like early ETH people and, you know, DeFi whales and stuff, you know, that were like playing these games. It was very PvP. But I do think that like it wasn't just, you know, people that were trading other people's money. I think there were actually participants in there who were trading their own money. You know, a lot of money was made and lost. Like there were things that were actually going on. It was genuine activity. Whether it was useful market activity is debatable. But it wasn't all, you know, Nexos and Celsius of the world.
Totally. I actually think I remember that tweet. And, you know, that's not the first time we've had run-ins with this type of person on Twitter. I remember the 3 Arrows Capital when they kind of went after you. And I remember I wrote them on my blacklist because like anyone that goes after a founder like that, it's just shameful in my opinion. But I would love to kind of understand from your side, what was the philosophical difference with that particular run-in?
Yeah, I think, you know, I've gone back and forth on this a lot, like in my mind, like, was I subconsciously subtweeting them? You know, I really don't like, you know, I said at the time, I was like, I don't think I was I don't think I had like 3 hours in my mind when I tweeted that. Right. I think they were part of it, but it was bigger than just them. And, you know, most of the time when I'm calling someone out on Twitter, it's multi-coin. Like, let's be honest, right? Like, if I'm subtweeting someone, it's almost always Kyle, right? And, you know, the thing that was interesting to me about that is Kyle and I had all these debates about all of this stuff. And, you know, they were deep into Solana and they were like doing all this stuff. And, you know, there's this kind of opportunistic, very, you know, sitting on the sideline, looking, like taking advantage of opportunities, kind of trader investor mentality that is okay. Like the market allows it. Like it's okay. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to tattoo like the Ethereum logo on, you know, your forearm to participate, right? Like, and, you know, I will give Multicoin credit. They were there still investing when a lot of funds just, you know, stopped. Right. And I remember talking to Kyle about like, you know, buying ETH at like $80 or whatever, you know, I think we were sitting at like ETHCC or something, or, you know, ETH New York or whatever. And, you know, he was like, yeah, I'm going to like load up on ETH. Now, his reason for loading up on ETH was, you know, very transparently like opportunistic, right? He's like, this thing's undervalued and I don't care about it really. I just want to make money on it. Mine was like, well, I want, you know, ETH because I want, you know, I want the ecosystem to kind of win, right? Then 3 hours turns up. Multicoin's been playing this game for years of just, opportunistically supporting new things and not really like going all in on something and whatever. And 3 hours is like, hold my beer. Like, you think that you like that? And they just like double down on that strategy, right? Now, little did we know that they were doing it with other people's money and they were doing all kinds of, crazy shit in the background. But it's ultimately, the responsibility of people in the ecosystem to call these things out. And it's really hard in crypto to do that. I tweeted that, these people were saying one thing, right? And they looked like they were kind of, standing by their convictions. But the instant that things shifted, they were going to shift, right? And my thesis was Ethereum will scale. Like at the moment, they're just shitting on Ethereum and saying Ethereum's garbage. Go with Solana or go with Avalanche or whatever the latest L1 thing was. And I was really frustrated by that. I was like, fine, competition is good, but you can't just sit here and shit on Ethereum. And then I know in 3 months' time we're going to get scaling is going to start to work, and they're going to turn up and be like, Ethereum scaling's amazing. Right. And, the fact that it got such a reaction out of Sue, I think is indicative of, the mirror was like, he didn't like what he saw right in the mirror. And, he lost his fucking mind and just like, lit himself on fire. Now, obviously then they blew up later and we realized that, a lot of the stuff that was going on. But, there was some cognitive dissonance there. You don't react that crazily to someone not even, like I was just subtweeting the group of them really. So anyway, so I think, like I've had a bit of an interesting track record of calling people out, between Sam, I think I called out Sam right before the FTX blow up where I was like, look, Sam is a very smart guy, which is exactly why you should not listen to anything that he says. Because whatever he's saying is psyops, right? He's psyopsing you. Like he's just like, I've talked to him enough times that I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like, what do I believe after you talk to this guy? Like he can just like mentally like, shift reality around you. So, the people that are out there doing that, I think they need to be called out. It's really hard. It's something that we just need to keep trying to do.
Totally. Yeah, I think a lot of people had similar thoughts around Sam, but no one really felt comfortable enough to call it out. And I think that if the behavior is incentivized, it's going to happen. And so, this isn't the last of these kind of characters in crypto. Every bull market will have them.
Looking for a stress-free crypto life in 2023? Go self-custodial with 1inch. The 1inch wallet aims to be the single app you need to manage crypto. Your 1inch wallet will act as a safe box due to hardware wallet connection, become your ultimate coin storage when adding custom tokens, and offer full versatility thanks to multi-chain support. It's easy to use, secure, and self-custodial. Go ahead and try 1inch now.
So I guess what advice would you have to someone who maybe sees similar signs but is afraid to call it out directly or publicly?
Yeah, and like just to be clear, right? Like that tweet, like I was not saying like Sam's a fraud. I was just saying you can't trust what he says because he's playing a game on a level. He's playing 4D chess and you're sitting there playing like normal chess, right? Like it wasn't like, oh, and also by the way, he stole all your money. Like I had no idea. Like when I found out about that, like someone was like, did you read the New York Times? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like this is insane, right? And so yeah, I was off Twitter at the time and I was finding out through like mainstream media that like this thing was going on. So, I'm not in any way saying that I had a sense. I would have bet you $1 million that FTX was not a fraud, right? Like I just did not have that sense. And I think this is one of the challenges, someone who does have some suspicions or thinks that, something's not right. You can call it out, but, one of the best examples that I ever had was one that I was personally involved in of how hard it is to get to the truth on a platform like Twitter. God bless Elon. He thinks that he can get to the truth on Twitter, but like I don't think it's a thing. But anyway, like I turned up to Mainnet, right, in New York, got off stage, and I was being told that I'd been subpoenaed as I was walking on stage. And I was like, no, pretty sure that's not like, maybe I've forgot about that, but I don't think that happened. Right. And the reality was that it was Doe. Doe had been subpoenaed as he was walking on stage. But in spite of the fact that there were 50 people standing around who saw this happen, we were all there, we were all in the room, and I was like, it wasn't me. For months and months and months afterwards, people were like, you got subpoenaed, didn't you? And I'm like, I really didn't. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it was that guy. Like, and so it's really, really hard. Even like the person who was standing there next to Doe when he got subpoenaed could have gotten on Twitter and been like, I literally just saw it happen. People were like, yeah, sure you did. Like, it's really, really hard in a space that is as adversarial as crypto and as crazy as crypto, where there's so much stuff going on, for someone to, call someone out, like absent, like, direct evidence. And even someone could have tweeted a photo of him getting the subpoena and people would not have believed it, right? Like, we're in a reality where it's just really hard to prove things. And so all I would say is, I guess, holding people accountable, calling them out is really helpful, but don't expect that it's going to work and it's going to, be successful. In the longer term, eventually people will blow themselves up. Someone who's just doing messed up stuff is going to blow themselves up. There's no avoiding that. And so, eventually you might get some, recognition that you were calling it out early, but like, it's, I'd much rather just not have it happen at all.
Absolutely. I think that's helpful. And I was actually on that panel with Doe, and it's crazy how calm he was during that thing. I would be like trembling. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit into Synthetix, and maybe for those that are listening that aren't super familiar, could you give them a TLDR and then also just explain why you're so passionate about Synthetix?
Yeah, so Synthetix is this ongoing weird experiment to see whether or not you can do really weird, hard stuff on chain. Is basically what it is, right? It started off as a stable coin. It evolved into, tokenized assets and exchanging of tokenized assets. It's then evolved further into, a pseudo lending platform, a perps platform, basically DeFi infrastructure that supports other, things like options, et cetera. So it's this evolving experiment in kind of financial engineering on chain, I guess, is what Synthetix really is. Like, that's the reality, right? It isn't any one thing. And I think, why am I passionate about it? Even after taking, circa 4 months off, right, and coming back, in the last 3 weeks, I've been having conversations with people that have been, really working on stuff. And I just find myself absorbed by the difficulty of the problem, by just the challenge and the complexity of the problem alone. Like, I think that people who are interested in hard problems are just drawn to Synthetix because, it's just still kind of an unsolved problem. Like, we don't know all the answers. We don't know what the optimal way of doing a lot of the stuff that we want to be able to do, on chain is. And Synthetix is really open about that and just kind of lays it all out there and says like, hey, we're doing all this weird stuff, and like some of it's working, some of it's not. And then we're iterating here. So it is a place, this kind of like skunk works of just experimentation that is really amazing to watch. So that's my reason for still, being excited by Synthetix. You never know what's going to come out of it.
Amazing. Yeah. And during this entire time, the Synthetix ecosystem has really been chugging along, and the community has released a bunch of new products. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the ones you're more excited about?
Yeah. So, when we pivoted from Haven, the stablecoin, to Synthetix, which was, again, like tokenized assets, so like tokenized Bitcoin, tokenized ETH, so like ERC20 versions of all these things that track the price of the, the external asset. In the same period that was going on, I had this idea of we should be able to do like a BitMEX style perpetual market, right? How hard could it be? And I was like, hey, like, we'll just smash this out in like 3 months or so and launch it. And it then just dragged out and kept getting deprioritized. And, for good reasons, bad reasons, organizational reasons, decentralization reasons, there were all kinds of reasons, right? Of like why this happened, why it didn't get the attention and focus that I think that it was supposed to get. And then eventually it got released, and, years later, right? And it just was kind of not optimal. The way that we built it was really not optimal. But the nice thing about, iterative experimentation is you release something, you're like, oh, right, that was really dumb. Okay, now I get it, right? And, even as we were designing this thing, like there were a lot of internal debates around like, how to do it within the community, right? People thought this was a good idea, that was a good idea, etc. We've now iterated and got to a point with Perps v2, the latest version that's been released, where we have actually released a bunch of markets. We've got more markets and Perps than we've really had even in like the on-chain tokenized assets for a long period of time. So we're slowly kind of iterating towards this thing, and it's starting to work. And I think that for this cycle to be successful, we need multiple implementations of perps. People want to trade perps for good or ill. That's what they want to do. They want leverage. They want to, they want to be able to trade on margin. And so being able to kind of meet that need within the Ethereum ecosystem is critical.
Absolutely. And it does feel like the perp space in DeFi is one of the faster growing spaces. And can you talk a little bit about how your product is different than other players like GMX or DYDX?
Yeah, I think like the nuances of, what's the difference between BitMEX and OKEX and, whatever. For the average person, they don't really care, right? It's not, it's a bit academic. When you talk about centralized exchanges, creating perps, right? Like, okay, BitMEX invented them, but then people have made little tweaks and, whatever. Obviously there are sometimes fairly critical ones like, the FTX perps, they steal all your money. That's a good, feature to be aware of, right? And so, we obviously want to talk about like, what are the differences and the nuances, but ultimately for a user, they really don't care. What they care about is liquidity. They care about, the trading experience. They care about like, what is the onboarding process for me? That's what a user cares about. And those are the things that I think, it's important that we have different options and we try different things. So, within DYDX, it's kind of a siloed thing, right? It exists in its own, kind of almost app chain silo, right? Which is cool. And it gives them, a number of advantages in terms of like onboarding and, what they can do with like usability and some other stuff. But it obviously doesn't allow for composability, right? That's something that it kind of prevents. And it's the jury's still out on how important composability is with perps. Do you want to be able to use your perp position to, collateralize an options thing, or, what does that sort of thing look like? But the nuances, I think, in terms of perps that are running on L2s versus perps that are running on, like something like Starkware, like roll up L2s versus, ZK L2s, are technically interesting, but like to a user, they don't care that much. Like really, like, DYDX is probably the best competitor, I would say, to like a centralized exchange right now. And part of that is because they've made some compromises in terms of, decentralization, in terms of how they achieve that. But that's okay, right? They're not going to steal all your money. So that's good, right? And so you can, at least you can tick that box of like, my money is safe, right? And so I do think that, that like ultimately, it's about having competition and about having, different options for users. And as you said, like we're starting to see that now. There's probably 10 different perps, solutions that are out there that I think, are going to be ready in the next like 6 to 12 months for mainstream.
Exciting. Amazing. Well, I would love to shift gears to you personally. I know you've had an on and off relationship with Synthetix governance. Can you walk us through that history and where you stand now?
Yeah, so, it turns out when you give up power, you lose the power to reclaim power, right? Like, short of an armed coup, it's really hard for me to have the level of control that I had at Synthetix, back in DeFi Summer, even, and even in 2019, like we were fairly decentralized. I was, I was not able to do some of the things that I was able to do in 2018, so this has been an ongoing, ceding of power to the community. I did find it a little awkward when, due to technical challenges, right? And like, there's been a lot of things where I take responsibility that like there was a technical challenge and a kind of expedient decision was made and some users kind of got rugged, right? Where they're like, well, I was kind of hoping to be able to do that and whatever. In this case, I was the user that got rugged. I was unable to vote for like a year, right? In Synthetix governance. Like I literally didn't even have voting power, right? And that was awkward. But I was still, I still had enough, I guess, cash in the community to get voted onto the council. And then I made a decision that I wasn't going to run for the council and would sort of see what would happen. And it was really interesting because I stopped running for the council. I resigned from the council, and then I watched the DMs flood in from all of the factions being like, they're doing a bad thing to me. And then this person would come in and be like, this guy is a monster. And like, it was hilarious to watch these things in real time, right? Where I was like, I don't think like people are so reactive and they get so like passionate about it. I'm like, I don't think either of the people on either side of this debate are monsters, right? I think that there's like a nuanced, disagreement about like some specific aspect of the protocol. But what has been really interesting in creating that power vacuum has been to sort of see how organically that power vacuum has been filled, right? And I tried to do it too early in the past, and I came back and I was like, okay, this is not working. I need to come back. There's chaos, and this, like, someone needs to build a thing, right? You want the people who are building the thing to be directed by the community, and you want the community to have control over what they're building, and you want it to be, this kind of two-way flow of communication, and that wasn't functioning. And so I was like, all right, like we made some mistakes, iterative experimentation, right? We did an experiment and it blew up and it was really bad. And we're like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board on that one. And we did. And we got to a point where as a community, we were like, okay, this is working. And so as it stands now, my relationship to Synthetix is, a large token holder who's kind of watching all of this stuff kind of happen from the sidelines without really, much direction. I'm having some conversations and there's some dialogue with some of the people that are building things, but I haven't even re-engaged with Discord because I just, I know how much of a black hole that can be in terms of just pulling you in. And at the moment I'm just trying to kind of get the lay of the land. But Synthetix functions perfectly without me, which there's a sadness there, right? Like tear rolls down the cheek, right? Like it doesn't need me anymore, and not even in like a governance theater. Like I'm actually in the back room, like Wizard of Oz style, like pulling all the fucking cables and stuff. Like it really doesn't need me. It hasn't had me for 4+ months, and it's done as well, if not better, than it would have if I was in there creating chaos. So I think in that respect, the experiment of decentralized governance has succeeded. That said, there are advantages to having someone who's fairly high profile who can communicate the narratives for a project that, and so I think that ongoing will probably be my role to, help to synthesize what's going on. There's a lot of different threads going on in Synthetix and try and pull that together and communicate it.
MetaMask Learn is an educational platform designed to immerse you in the world of Web3, what it is, why it matters, and how to get started. You will learn core concepts in fresh and engaging lessons from the world's leading self-custodial wallet. MetaMask Learn is for you if you've been interested in Web3 but just don't know where to start, you've bought some crypto on an exchange but don't know what to do with it, you still don't understand Web3 principles because they've been too jargon heavy, and you want to know what the fuss about Web3 really is.
Yeah, and it makes me think back to that tweet from Three Arrows Capital where they were kind of criticizing you for leaving the ecosystem, and it goes back to them really not understanding the ethos of decentralization, because that really is the goal. And I think Yaniv Tal famously said, you treat power like a hot potato and you really want to give it away. But I think this conversation would probably have most executives from traditional finance or board of directors fainting and wondering, how you get there and why that's important. So maybe can you double click on that ethos for maybe someone from the traditional space who's listening to this conversation?
Yeah, when all you have are like top-down hierarchies, right? Power hierarchies, then everything starts to look like something that needs top-down power, right? Like that's the only tool you have. You shape things around you to be governed by those things, right? And that is essentially corporate governance with some weird offshoots of things where it's not even like a top-down hierarchy. It's just like a dictatorship, right? With one guy with, super voting rights for, in 100 years, and his zombie, family gets to run it forever. like this weird things, but it's like, essentially these are just top-down hierarchical organizations, right? Where power flows from the top and that's it. And, holacracy and some other weird stuff that people have tried this and things like that. But we have not had the tools to coordinate humans around the world on the internet and not have it devolve into chaos. We just didn't have those tools. We kind of don't have them still, but we're pretending like we do. And we're slowly building them in real time and being like, look over here, like this is a thing, right? And, so like we need to work out how we govern ourselves in ways that are not down, like top-down hierarchies, right? We have to. That's so critical. And these experiments are important. And so, when I look at Synthetix, and I've said this for a long time, and it's becoming more and more true every day, Synthetix as a governance experiment versus Synthetix, even if Synthetix ends up being the dominant perps protocol in DeFi, let's say, right? And what would that look like? Let's say it's got, let's say you take centralized exchanges and, the dominant one has 25% or whatever, for a while there was some, anomalies there. I think we've talked enough about FTX, but, they're like the market, the market is going to be split amongst like 3 or 4 winners and, 20-25% of the perps volume is going to go to one DeFi protocol. And, the people who own that token are going to do really well and it's going to be super exciting and, whatever, right? In terms of the impact on humanity that has, it's just not that high. Like, I love BitMEX and it's really cool, but like, it's not changing humanity, and I think that this is the opportunity that all of the OG DeFi protocols have. And I think most of them have taken it and the experiments are playing out. We are experimenting on how we coordinate humans globally online, in a way that is, kind of enforceable without recourse to, like a specific jurisdiction and laws and courts and what have you, right? Like we're working out a way to get people to coordinate and all work on a thing and have something that's like, kind of self-contained and internally consistent. And if Synthetix, the experiments that we've run, if any of those components of those experiments end up being incorporated in like future online governance, that's infinitely more valuable than being like the cool perps protocol for, that decade. Like it's just not even close. So to me, that's really why it was so important to me. Even if in doing the experiment, Synthetix had failed, the information that was gathered from that experiment, I think is more valuable than if it had succeeded.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this space is because the way we coordinate online and incentivize that coordination can really make huge waves in the world. And if you think about it, all the problems that exist in the world, it's not because we don't have enough of the whatever thing. It's because we can't coordinate to get people what they need. And I think with this technology, if we do these experiments right over time, we'll actually be able to coordinate, food, water, shelter, whatever is needed. And I guess that's why I'm so passionate about so many of these experiments. And you kind of touched on that. What would you say is one of the harder things about being a founder in crypto, maybe tailored to someone who wants to follow a similar path?
I can only speak to myself. And I think one of the things that I've kind of realized over the last 6 months, having gone to some level of success as a founder, I always thought that this idea of workaholism was like kind of a funny joke, right? I was like, yeah, but like you need to do it in order to be successful. And like, there's not really any such thing as like a workaholic, right? Like this is just like a thing that you have to do. And like, you just kind of, keep grinding, right? Like we used to have this joke in Synthetix about like the death march. Like we were on a death march and it's not a joke. Like we were like, you were just grinding every single day and you would just show up and like do the thing. And like, we're in the office for like, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. It was insane. You're under resourced, you're stressed, you're tired, and I think that like there's a tendency to kind of, lionize the people that are willing to do that. And maybe on some level, like that is necessary, right? Like there's some level of like commitment for, a short period of time. But I think as a founder, and again, speaking of my own personal experience, I didn't realize until I took a step back how unhealthy that obsession was. And look, I've looked at a lot of aspects of my life, right? I make no I don't hide the fact that like, I used to be someone who liked to do drugs and do chaotic things and like run around, being crazy, right? All of that in my mind, I think kind of comes from a similar place, right? Of like trying to avoid your own brain. There's like this, like, let me find the hardest problem that I can get absorbed in and just work on that for 90 hours and then like collapse into bed and then get up the next day and do that, right? Like all of that stuff is about like, how do I avoid dealing with my own mind? How do I not look inwards? How do I just keep looking outwards? And so I think that, for me, as a founder, crypto is, and I've seen this happen. I've seen it attract, traditional startups, SaaS startups or whatever, like have aspects of this, but you touched on it. Crypto is 24/7. There's never been a better drug for a workaholic than crypto. Like it is the best thing that humans have designed for like work. If workaholism is your drug, right? And I say that in like a real, like this is a real fucking thing. Like this is not a joke, right? Like I used to joke about it and be like, ha ha ha, back to, like chaining myself to the desk for 18 hours, right? Like, like people are crazy. Like this is not a real thing. Being obsessed with work is dangerous. It's as dangerous as being obsessed with anything else. And crypto has the tendency to suck people in because it can feed an obsession. If running a SaaS startup or like being involved in like an early stage, startup, online retail startup or whatever is, I don't know, like marijuana, right? On the scale of drugs, like crypto's crystal meth. Like you're not fucking around. Like you're like this, you're up for 18 days straight and like, you're scrolling things on the ceiling. Like you've lost your mind. Right. And so I think the one thing that I would say is just be mindful, of how crypto taps into whatever obsessive aspects there might be in yourself. Right. And it's so easy to ignore. I ignored it for years and years. And it's like, haha, balance. Whatever, you weak people, like what's wrong with you? Like go and like, run into a brick wall 100 times and like see what happens, like literally like it was something that I just could not see. I was so resistant to it. And so, like as I've like realized, having done all the things that I wanted to do on some level and like been successful and got all this stuff and still unable to kind of sit with myself and face my own brain, that the obsession that I had with crypto, and there's healthy aspects. Like crypto is amazing. All the things we talked about, the power to transform human, like all of that stuff is amazing, but you can take something too far. And so, genuinely, like that's the thing that I've really been trying to reflect on over the last like few months is like how to find a balanced way of getting the good parts without the obsessive parts and not, not kind of having my inability to kind of sit with myself, be transformed into this like perverse, seeking out of any kind of obsession I could find.
Yeah, I can relate to that as someone who also has been a workaholic, since I was about 16. And I feel like for me, I was kind of in this survival mode and just ignoring everything else. But lately, it's no longer survival mode. It's, this wanting to make a positive impact, wanting to leave the world a better place. And so I guess for you, when you had that transition, any advice for others who are maybe going through a similar transition where you had to take a step back, you looked inward, and just kind of, and now you're coming back to the field and running back in, but maybe in a more balanced way?
Yeah, I'm trying to do it in a more measured way. And I think the thing that I would say is that, if you, and like I'm in recovery from drugs and alcohol, right? Like I genuinely was not like anything in my life that I could use to kind of avoid dealing with, my own sort of brain I would use, right? So work was the main thing for years and years, for like decades, right? But then, if there was like a break in the work or they shut down the office, I was like, oh fuck, what do I do? Like I got to go and, fill my head with chemicals, right? To stop, from dealing with this. So what I would say is that if you do try to, find a balance or, you do try to interrogate look at your intentions, look at your motivations. What is your motivation? And for me, my motivations were mixed. My motivations were all of the things that are exciting about crypto and all of the things but perverted into something that was my motivation became to avoid kind of, dealing with myself and thinking about like how I felt, or thinking about what I cared about, or what was important to me. All of that stuff just fell by the wayside, and it was just like find this thing to be obsessed with and focus on. And so I think that is a really hard thing to do. But examining your own motivations is probably the one thing that I would say. And when you really do examine your motivations in a kind of deep and honest way, and are open to seeing where your motivations might be, skewed towards something that is a bit more obsessive or not as healthy, that's the first step. And then from there, you can be like, okay, what's my motivation for, doing a bunch of drugs? Like, I was like, oh, just having fun and like doing drugs. Drugs are fun, but it turns out that when you really like deeply inspect those motivations and you find out actually maybe those motivations were slightly different to what I thought they were, that's the first step in kind of unlocking like some personal growth and understanding of yourself. So that's what I would say. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I almost feel like collectively in the crypto space, we are kind of shifting to this mental health focus. So it's great you were able to take time and reflect, and I'm proud of you for the journey so far. I'm sure Cami asked this question, but I'm going to ask it again now that you've done your reflection. How are you Defiant?
So, I've always been Defiant. And as I said, like, I think she asked me this question, like, when I was sitting that like, concrete stairwell or something like that in 2019. I am Defiant in that I believe that what we're doing is the optimal way to coordinate people. I believe that this is, if not the optimal way, it is a more optimal way, right? It is a way that's in the direction of optimally coordinating people. And historical ways to coordinate people have been infected because we didn't have the technology to do it. And now we do. We've invented these, ways to kind of finally coordinate people online, in the form of blockchains, right? That's Satoshi's thing, right? It wasn't a payment network. It was this, it was this ability to like create consensus online. And in order to see that through, you're going to have a bunch of dumb idiots who are not going to like it and who are going to try and stop you, and are going to tell you that, you are wrong and bad and, trading like unregistered securities or whatever things they're going to come up with, right? Whatever their theory is of like, your rat poison squared or whatever. But if you truly have the conviction that this is the thing that is going to really allow, for another wave of innovation and kind of progress in humanity, then you just need to ignore that stuff and be Defiant and just keep pushing and keep doing it. And you know what? If you're wrong, no big deal, right? If we're wrong and none of this is, made any sense, okay, like, no big deal. But if we're right, the impact is exponentially more powerful than, if you went and just worked at Goldman Sachs.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much, Kain. This was such a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Yeah, it was great to be here. Thank you.